Hello, and welcome to the BrightView presentation on the landscape at Province. A brighter future begins here. In this presentation, we will provide landscape characteristics and practices for the Province community. Meet BrightView. BrightView is a combination of the two largest landscape companies in the United States. This creates better resources for our local teams to tap into to provide better service to our customers.
Before we dive into the landscaping at Province, it is important to first understand the nature of the climate in our area. Here at Province, we are located directly in the center of the Sonoran Desert. The Sonoran Desert is characterized by a hot and very dry climate that receives an average of 8 inches of rainfall per year, most of which falls during monsoon months. On the drive to Maricopa, Province residents get a good opportunity to see the type of plants that survive in this area. This starkly vegetated desert is made up mostly of native species whose existence depends on summer rain to germinate seedlings before dying out and starting the cycle again the following season. As we can all imagine, this is not the ideal landscape to sell homes. Developers know that people prefer green turf and lush vegetation over the barren wasteland we see down the street. For this reason, communities across Arizona, like Province, plant a vast palette of shrubs ranging from desert-adapted to subtropical and even tropical species that are introduced from all over the world. With this introduction of non-native water-loving species, water usage increases dramatically. This increased need for water necessitates affordable water sources in order to remain economically viable. With economics in mind, many communities throughout Arizona have opted for effluent water sources, also known as wastewater or reclaimed water. This water is substantially cheaper than potable water, but is of very low quality. While low-quality water alone is an issue in and of itself, when coupled with certain prominent desert soil types, issues can be exacerbated.
Hi, my name is TJ Winsler. I'm a senior account manager with BrightView. I'm a graduate of The Ohio State University with almost 20 years of experience as a golf course superintendent here in Arizona. Additionally, I have firsthand experience with your community as the agronomic director for DLC when they were on property as a landscape provider. This slide here is the latest water test that was conducted on the irrigation water used at Province. There are a lot of scientific words and confusing numbers on this slide, and we'll dive deeper into a few of these individual values in upcoming slides. But I'd like to point out one very important parameter here. Salt applied per acre foot of water used. You'll see this figure expressed near the bottom of this report. At Province, 26,300 pounds of salt are dissolved within 1 acre foot of water. To help you better understand the scope of the problem, here's a real-world example. That equates to 1,095 dump trucks full of salt dissolved in the same amount of water needed to fill 11 Arizona swimming pools. I don't know about you, but I think that's a lot of salt. This slide is to help us better understand salt. Salt comes in many forms. Sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, and calcium chloride are the three most important to understand when discussing plants and soil. Everyone remember back to 7th grade chemistry. Everything on Earth works on the principles of polarity, positive and negative charges. This holds true when discussing soils and water as well. When we think of dirt, many of us don't realize that dirt is made up of tiny individual particles. You have silt, sand, clay, organics, tiny rock fragments, water, and air. Each of these soil parts has both a positive and a negative attachment point. All forms of salt carry a positive charge, causing them to stick to the negative sites on the soil particles. When too much salt enters the system through the water, the natural balance of positive versus negative is thrown off and the soil stops working correctly. Food for the plants and grass becomes unavailable or bound up within the soil. The second parameter here listed is the EC, or electrical conductivity, of the sample. Here again, this value is very high and helps support the earlier findings that the water in Province is full of salt. Now we're looking at the last two important water parameters. Everyone is familiar with pH. Even my youngest daughter understands that pH 7 is good and that anything over or under that number is bad. Province water is very alkaline. Readings over 7 are considered alkaline and below 7 acidic. Alkaline water for drinking is supposed to be good for you, which is debatable, but bad for soil quality. Repetitive use of this water can alter the soil pH, which in turn affects the solubility of plant food. We'll discuss this in more detail later in the presentation. SAR, or the sodium absorption ratio, is the second topic of this slide. This tells us the ratio of sodium versus magnesium and calcium. Sodium is more damaging to plants than the latter two ions, so it is imperative that we understand how this water will affect our soil. With very high SAR values, the soil undergoes a transformation known as dispersal. This means that the soil particles can no longer stick together. Remember our last slide and our discussion of polarity, or that we have a dispersed soil rather than a well-flocculated soil. I know, right now you're saying, huh? Dispersed soil loses its pore space between soil particles, thus eliminating areas in the soil for water and air and plant roots. Much of our efforts go towards trying to alleviate the effects of sodium in the soil to keep these spaces open. Now that we have a basic understanding of the province water, we can move on to the really important stuff, the dirt. Here you can see a soil sample from both the villas and the main community turf. I'm not spending much time on this slide, but as you can see, some of the same values as the water are tested as well as available ions for plant nutrition. Here we go again. Let's talk some more about salts. But now we're talking about where all these dump trucks full of salt end up, in the soil. A healthy soil would typically test below 300 parts per million sodium. Here at Province, we average 1,000 parts per million. This is over 3 times higher than recommended. When coupled with the higher than recommended calcium and magnesium, you can quickly destroy soil integrity. Soil EC is similar to water EC, but not exactly the same. Where the EC value of water is a representation of the total amount of salt, soil EC represents the quantity of available nutrients as well as exchangeable sodium. This value is indicative of excess nitrogen fertilizer or a high level of sodium. The water samples plus soil samples all point to high sodium. As mentioned previously, accumulation of sodium leads to poor soil tilth and low permeability, making plant growth extremely difficult. Soil pH is crucial for plant nutrition. All plant nutrients are available based on their solubility as it relates to pH. Soil pH is a good indicator of nutrient balance. At a pH of 7, the soil releases the maximum amount of nutrients necessary for growth. Any readings above or below 7 start to affect this availability. We'll discuss this with the aid of a chart later, but needless to say, with a pH approaching 9 in the villas, many essential nutrients are in short supply for the plants and grass to use for growth. By now, you should be starting to understand that we have a salt problem. But you may be saying, TJ, what does this all mean? Well, it means we have very challenging irrigation water, which is causing our soil to break down and seriously inhibit our ability to grow healthy plants. The chart on this slide helps illustrate this point. At the current province EC soils level, we are limited on what plants will survive and need to actively manage these salts. In a perfect world, we would apply gypsum to get the soil to release the sodium and then flush the sodium out. Unfortunately, Many areas of province do not have adequate drainage to allow this process to work. Consequently, soil conditions continue to degrade. With this continued increase in soil EC, the plants that can survive will become more restricted. Mother Nature knows this. That's why the plants in the desert surrounding Maricopa all look the same. There is very little variability. Okay, let's take a minute to review. Province has very salty irrigation water. When applied to the soil, this high salinity water increases the amount of salt in the soil. Poor infiltration rates, coupled with poor drainage, lead to unhealthy soil. An unhealthy soil gives us unhealthy plants and turf. Increasing soil sodium levels restricts the plants available for use at province. And as you can see in this diagram, water enters through the irrigation pipes, is put out by the sprinklers, is absorbed through the soil, percolates deeper into the soil, but unfortunately leaves all the salt behind in the root zone. Here you can see the chart I mentioned earlier showing the restrictive nature of pH on plant nutrition. With a pH of 9, as mentioned previously, you can see here where essential nutrients of phosphorus, potassium, boron, and some of the minor nutrients become extremely restricted. And if we back down to a pH of 8.5, phosphorus almost becomes non-existent. And phosphorus is essential for all plants to grow new roots. It doesn't take a soil scientist to see that the pH levels at province are working against us. Thank you for your time. Robbie will now explain in more detail some of the specific challenges beyond soil and water present here at province.
Here at Province, our landscape irrigation water is stored in the lakes throughout the community. The two negative effects of on-site storage are evaporation, which exacerbates salt concentrations, and delivery of microorganisms, algae, and bryozoa into our irrigation components. Lake maintenance is vitally important to effective landscape irrigation. The last element that factors into landscape health and quality is pest management. At Province, we deal with waterfowl, turf weeds, insects and disease, and rodents ranging from gophers to rabbits, rats, and skunks. Each of these presents a unique challenge. Now that you understand the environmental challenges we face on a daily basis, let's look forward to the solutions we have already introduced, as well as some of the proposed systemic solutions that are specifically related to the villas. Here are some of the highlights. Over the past year, we began regular use of sulfuric acid to lower the pH of the water and break down organisms in the lake water that clog our heads. We repaired the fertigation system to better address plant and turf needs. We have scheduled the replacement of the 2 large irrigation filters on the main pump. We've scheduled quarterly treatments of the irrigation wet well to reduce amounts of organisms clogging the irrigation components. And we began preparations to implement a rolling 3-year overseed schedule that will A. limit the amount of reclaimed water being applied to the turf, B. allow Bermuda to reestablish without competition from perennial ryegrass, as Bermuda grass needs at least 110 days of active, unimpeded growth, and C. allow for an aggressive pre- and post-emergent schedule to commence in non-seeded turf areas. And lastly, we have proposed 2 options for future enhancements to villa yards to either eliminate turf in favor of xeriscaping or renovate turf areas with new soil and sod that includes the replacement of large overbearing mesquite, sisu, and palo verde trees with small to medium-sized patio trees. As you can see from this diagram, the villas have to deal with all of the turf limiting issues. Like the rest of Province, the villas deal with water, soil, and some shade issues. However, unlike the rest of the common area, The villas must deal with water, soil, shade, shallow aggressive roots from palo verde, sisu, and mesquite, as well as pop-up heads that clog daily. All of these issues combined creates what you currently have in your yards, an environment where turf, especially Bermuda, is difficult to grow. With that said, there are solutions. In this before picture, you can see the typical villa. The grass area is off color, patchy, brown, and in need of a makeover. In this after picture, you can see the Bermuda has been removed in favor of granite, riprap, small patio trees, and shrubs. This design eliminates the roots, soil, water, shade, and pop-up issues we would experience in trying to grow Bermuda year-round. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation provided by BrightView. It is our hope that we can work together to come up with solutions to address your concerns. After watching this video, if you still have questions, please direct them to the association and we'll be happy to address them.